Pope Leo speaking out on the traditional Latin Mass, church teaching on LGBT issues, and will he continue the church's controversial deal with China? The Prayerful Posse explores it all next. Welcome to a very special Prayerful Posse. Be sure to subscribe to the show. It's a wonderful way to support our work. It's totally free, so go subscribe like crazy. And I wanted to announce something I've never done before. I'm going on a cruise to the Grecian Isles in the footsteps of the apostles, St. Paul and St. John. We're going to Philippi, Thessalonica, Athens, Corinth, Crete, Patmos, and Ephesus to visit the Blessed Virgin's house. Space is very limited. But this 11-day cruise in September of 2026 is going to be incredible. Go to RaymondArroyo.com, reserve your spot. It's going to be one of those life-changing trips, family. RaymondArroyo.com. And now I'd like to welcome the Prayerful Posse, canon lawyer, priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father Gerald Murray, and editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org, Robert Royal. Gentlemen, thanks for coming together again. Pope Leo did this interview with journalist Elise Allen for a new book, which is making some news. He said this about the traditional Latin Mass. Between the Tridentine Mass and the Vatican II Mass, the Mass of Paul VI, I'm not sure where that's going to go. It's obviously very complicated. I know that part of that issue, unfortunately, has become, again, part of a process of polarization. People have used the liturgy as an excuse for advancing other topics. It's become a political tool, and that's very unfortunate. Father, Pope Leo went on to say that there would be an opportunity soon to meet with the TLM community, presumably referring to the TLM, to be celebrated in St. Peter's Basilica by Cardinal Raymond Burke. I had a conversation with him about this last week. The Cardinal seemed very optimistic given the permission that was granted by Pope Leo to say that Mass. Your thoughts on the Pope characterizing the ancient rite of the Mass as a part of a process of polarization?
Well, I find this whole language of polarization troubling because it's basically a Hegelian category, meaning it's a philosophical approach that truth is in the middle, and at the extremes you have things that are to be rejected. And that's not how the Catholic Church understands the gospel, their solemn teachings, and the liturgy is not a polarizing thing in and of itself because it's a form of worship. And in that same interview, Pope Leo said that basically the new Mass, there's not much difference between the new Mass and the old Mass if it's well celebrated. And I said, Pope Leo, don't you understand that this has been an issue since the end of the Second Vatican Council? It wasn't made up. Archbishop Lefebvre and his followers had some objections to the changes made in the Mass. There's nothing wrong with questioning how things are done when there's a reform. It should be done respectfully. And I think Pope Benedict arrived at a very good solution, which is let those who want the old Mass celebrate it, let those who want the new Mass celebrate it. But to kind of disqualify and say, well, by advocating for the old Mass, you're drawing people to an extreme position, I don't think that's the right analysis.
Yeah, well, and I want to get, in a moment, Father, I'll let you stew on this while I go to Bob, but I need you to describe for people the difference between those two Masses, the new Mass of Paul VI and the traditional Latin Mass. But Bob, your reaction to this idea of polarization, but clearly in the same breath, there's some openness here. At least the Pope is willing to hear an argument.
Yeah, I think that is maybe the hopeful takeaway from what isn't really yet a settled opinion on his part. And to his credit, he also mentioned the abuses of the new form of the Mass that have taken place that have caused some people of more traditional kind of orientation to object what they are finding. I mean, we've all talked about the clown masses, and these things go on, to this day they go on in a strange way. But look, the liturgy is something that isn't just marginal. It's the way we pray is who we are. And we need to recognize that at the deepest possible level, that we even know, so far as we know, the surveys that were done of the bishops by Pope Francis, remember this caused a great controversy, we've talked about it.
Yeah.
Most bishops the ones who responded at least, and you have to assume that the ones who responded are the ones that had some interest in telling the Pope what they're thinking, the ones who responded said they had no problem in the majority. So if there is a polarization, I don't think it's coming, at least in my own experience, and I think for most people's experience, it's not coming from those who want the traditional Latin Mass, who just want the traditional Latin Mass. They're not looking for any ideological arguments, or they're not even getting into theology other than the theology of the liturgy.
Well, and the Pope mentioned the abuses of the new Mass, but no one's suggesting that it be suppressed or banned,
No,
because of that. And Father, this notion, this narrative, I'm going to use the term narrative because that's what I think it is, this narrative that a Mass that was being celebrated, the traditional Latin Mass, for years under Pope Benedict, along with the new Mass in the same parish, this didn't cause any controversy. There was no polarization, but this is the narrative. Tell us the difference between that new Mass and the old Mass in substance. What is difference? Because even the Pope here makes what I would argue you could quibble about. I don't think it's a correct appreciation that, well, they're the same. Just say it in Latin. Say the new Mass in Latin.
Well, no, the old Mass, the structure of it's essentially the same as the new Mass because you basically have the beginning, you have the Confiteor, the Gloria, then you have the opening prayer, the readings, the offertory, then you have the canon, and then you have the Lamb of God and the offering of communion, of final blessing. But the form is a lot different. Prayers at the foot of the altar to begin it. I remember Alice von Hildebrand, the wife of Dietrich von Hildebrand, who was a great lover of the traditional Latin Mass. She said to me, in the old Mass, before you approached the altar, you begged pardon for your sins. And it was very symbolically done because the altar boys would repeat the Confiteor after the priest had said it, and they represented the congregation. Now, in reforms that were done in the 50s, the people could also, at a dialogue Mass, say the Confiteor. But only then did you go up to the altar and kiss it. And the altar represents Christ. So before you approach the body of Christ, you ask for pardon. The offertory prayers were changed, and that is something that serious objections to. They became mealtime blessing prayers. They weren't as sacrificially oriented as the old offertory prayers. Then one of the greatest differences is the silent canon, because in the old Mass, the priest says the words, so the whole canon of the Mass, it's very silently, and then the words of consecration are not heard by most people. Now, all of this changed when microphones were introduced, and the Vatican did permit microphones on altars. So, Bob will remember when I was a kid, I barely remember the old Mass, but that was a big difference. And when I went to my first traditional Latin Mass as a young priest, and I saw the silent canon, I was very moved. The silent canon is, Pope Benedict said this as a theologian, it's like the iconostasis. You protect the sacred offering by surrounding it with mystery, just like iconostasis does. So that was, and then of course we have the other aspects. Communion was received kneeling at the altar rail, it was received on the tongue. You did not have, communion in the hand and people standing. So there are other elements, and people are aware of that. But the fact of the matter is, there are different sensibilities that prompted the changes, and the Church is willing to respect those under Pope John Paul II and Benedict. It was only Pope Francis who said there's only one way to look at the Mass. And that was a problem.
And he cleaved, cut off the entire tradition that preceded it, or tried to. Meanwhile, and I guess this is part of that attempt to extinguish the past. And as you said, I agree with you, Father, there is something substantively different about the pacing, the timing, the movements, the gestures, and the people, particularly young people, they are absorbing that. I mean, I didn't make the Latin Mass this week. I was running too late, but I pulled up right after, and floods of people are coming out of church. Young people with the babies and the mantillas on their heads. I mean, there's a mass following here that the Church shouldn't ignore. And my bet is Pope Leo will get an earful from those who really do understand the difference between the new and the old, and hopefully they can bring him, up to speed on the nuances of that and what's really attracting this young audience. Meanwhile, the ban on the TLM goes into full effect, in the Diocese of Charlotte, North Carolina. We talked about this early on. The beginning of October, there'll be no more Mass, Latin Mass in the parishes, just in one remote worship center. It's not even a parish. And the outgoing Bishop of Monterey, California, has killed the traditional Latin Mass in that diocese as he moves to take over the Diocese of Austin, Texas, where I'm sure he'll do the same. Father, this seems to be an obsession at this point.
Well, I think this is part of the syndrome, we could say, of supporting Pope Francis's vision of things and saying, you know, those bishops say Pope Francis made this decision, we must go along with it. And the only answer to that is you say, no, wait a minute. Pope Francis also did not abolish the Fraternity of St. Peter and the Institute of Christ the King. In other words, and he gave them, you know, permission to continue to do what they were always doing, which is to celebrate the Latin Mass. So it never made sense to me that you could have some priests who are authorized by the Pope, and then others, their local bishops, you know, are forbidding them. There was a schizophrenia here, which basically is shown in the fact that you can have a diocese where the Latin Mass is still permitted, and then the diocese next door, they shut it all down. It makes no sense to me, because where in the history of the church do pastors throw people out of their parishes who are obedient, loyal Catholics because the form of the Mass that they like, the Pope didn't really like it? We just have to say, Holy Father, you're entitled to your opinion, but please, you know, isn't the church more than the hierarchy? We've always been told that.
You're right. We're always told it's the people of God.
Let's listen, you know.
Yeah, it's the people of God's church until the people of God want, you know, to be sacred, reverend, holy, and tie themselves to tradition. Then it's no longer the people of God. It's the people of the Pope, the Church of the Pope. Bob, I want to move to something that we've also covered in recent weeks, really in years, regarding diplomatic relations with China. The Pope said this, quote, "In the short term, I will continue the policy on China that the Holy See has followed." Pope Leo is referring to that still secret Vatican agreement with China, allowing the CCP input into choosing Catholic bishops and confirming them. What do you think is the point here of continuing this policy?
Well, I would say overall, and this one point is just part of an overall sense that I think we get of him from this interview. He says actually early on in the excerpts that have been published that it's something new for him to be on the world stage, that there's a huge learning curve that he's going through. And I kind of take that reading as the kind of thing that a parish priest comes when he comes into a new parish, and you know the bishop may say to him, look, take a year, learn what's going on, figure out what's good and what's bad and what's happened in the past. And then after you've got a grip on what's been happening out there, you can do something. I don't know that he's been very intimately involved in these negotiations with China. He's been to China, as I understand.
Yes.
So he has some experience of what's there, but certainly he has to know that since that so-called secret agreement was signed, that the situation of Catholics in China has not improved. No. And in fact, there's been pressure put on the hierarchy. As our friend Nina Shea has documented, 10 bishops are missing. We don't know where they are. They could be dead. They could just be in prison. They could be being brainwashed, which is typical of the Chinese these days. And then a lot of pressure is put on the individual churches, where signs of the Virgin Mary, crosses are taken down. President Xi is talking about sinicizing the Chinese church, which means making it internal to China and not externally connected to the Vatican, and all sorts of difficulties like that. That inevitably, I think he's a fair man. He's an intelligent man. If he's going to look at this in an objective way, he's going to have to deal with this at some point. He probably isn't in a position to make any changes right now, but. Inevitably, there's going to have to be some change, because it's not a good situation. We know our friend Jimmy Lai is finally being tried in China for treason and some other trumped-up charges, and we can hope that he is found guilty and expelled and allowed to go to England, where he has citizenship.
Yeah, Father, it is outrageous to me, and I frankly had forgotten, and it's a pity that the church is not consistently raising up these 10 missing bishops who have either been arrested or under house arrest or have been ferried away to some concentration camp. The fact that the church isn't holding these people up and drawing attention to the suffering church in China. Do you think there's some long-range plan here, or the Pope is evolving one?
I don't think the Pope has a long-range plan at this point. Now, the Secretary of State may have, because they are the ones who negotiated the agreement. But I'll chime in and say absolutely regrettable, because, again, the role of the Catholic Church, the mission of the Church, is not to engage in diplomatic negotiations with governments. I mean, is that how the Roman martyrs treated the emperors? Before we go to the Colosseum to be slain, could we have a sit down and write a document? Yeah, we don't do that. The church's mission is to preach salvation, and that's what's being harmed by this agreement. I don't know if you saw, as part of the latest news out of China, is they're forbidding Catholics to use the internet as a tool to evangelize. This is a new decree coming down. So you're basically surrendering the selection of your bishops to a group of people who do not have any interest in what you're doing, except to shut it down. And that's what they're doing. They're shutting it down one by one. And, if the Pope wants to display wisdom in this matter, he should call in Cardinal Zen and convene a meeting to kind of reassess the whole thing. Because Cardinal Zen, we always talk about peripheries, getting to Rome to tell things. Hong Kong is the most on the longest periphery from Rome that you can imagine. But Cardinal Zen's a 95-year-old man with wisdom and experience. He should be listened to.
Yeah, and he made that trip to let the cardinals know about this before this conclave. You would think that, there might have been some sensitivity to that. Hopefully that witness endures. That's a good segue, Father, to Pope Leo reflecting on how he sees his role as Pope. He said this: "I don't see my primary role as trying to be the solver of the world's problems. I don't see my role as that at all, really. Although I think that the church has a voice, a message that needs to continue to be preached, to be spoken and spoken loudly," end quote. Father, then Bob, isn't Jesus Christ the answer to the world's problems?
Well, of course he is, because the real problem in the world is sin and ignorance, ignorance of God and the refusal to obey his law. The route to happiness: bear your cross to Calvary, die, and rise with Christ. So the message of salvation, that's what, by the way, Latin Mass, people wanting to have Lectio Divina, read the scriptures, prayer. People know what the church offers. They want it. Now, when we get into this environmentalism and immigration advocacy, now we have the artificial intelligence challenge. We always have to step back and say, we speaking from the perspective of what Christ is wanting to do in the world through us. We shouldn't pose as an alternate expert who's going to tell governments what to do.
Bob, your reaction to this job description, if you will.
If I'm not mistaken, it was Madonna who objected to Francis saying this, because, people who are worldly want the church to talk about worldly matters. And I'm glad that he said that directly.
Yeah.
He kind of also then later in the interview, and this I think again is part of his learning curve that he's going through as an international public figure, playing on the biggest stage that you can possibly imagine, which is the Catholic Church in the world. He still also talks about, talks about things like immigration and climate change and whatnot. The church doesn't have any particular insight into these things. I mean, what should the immigration policy be in the United States? What the church here and what he has often said is we should respect the dignity of human beings. Well, yeah, of course we should. All human beings have dignity that was given to them by God, but that doesn't solve the question of how much immigration can any particular country tolerate. In Europe, and I think this is something that he's going to have to confront before long, something similar to what Father was talking about in China is going on. We just learned in the past few days that apps like Hallow are being banned by the European Union, and online Bible resources, presumably because they say out of worries about safety, or somehow these are going to harm minorities or maybe Muslims. And there's a kind of a veto power that is now going on about the presence of Christianity in developed countries. We see the same thing in a less formalized way here in the United States. So look, these are big questions that he's going to have to grow up to. And I like starting from the humble point that we don't really, first of all, it isn't really our business to try to save the world by solving all the world's problems, because the church can't do that, really. But to emphasize those important things, that Christ is the answer. We have certain moral principles that flow out of our faith in Jesus Christ. We seek to respect all people, and we provide a floor there for people of goodwill. And not everybody is of goodwill who's playing as an international actor. People of goodwill who want to respect that can use that to find ways to solve certain problems. But it's not the church's role to solve those problems.
Yeah, Father, since Bob raised that theologian, Madonna, I'm going to read her comment. She reacted to the Pope's job description there. She said the whole point of teaching and learning the gospel is to inspire people to love one another and make the world a better place, not just with words, with actions, which is exactly what Jesus did. I'm truly disappointed by this, Madonna said. Are you disappointed, Father?
No, I'm not disappointed, because I think it's a necessary corrective. The church was not founded in order that we would have national parks with no garbage on the lawns. And I'm all in favor of having national parks with no garbage, but that's not the mission of the church. The mission of the church is to get people into heaven. It's to help souls know, love, and serve God in this life and be happy with Him forever in the next. That's the message. And, Madonna, she is a Catholic, and she was raised a Catholic, and I pray that she'll, make it to heaven along with me and all of us. But, the Pope's job is not a worldly success story mission, solve all the problems. That's not the truth.
During a lengthy interview, or this lengthy interview rather, with Alan, the Pope reflected on LGBT issues, which he placed in the category of hot button issues. Your reaction to this comment? He said, quote, "People want the church doctrine to change, want attitudes to change. I think we have to change attitudes before we even think about changing what the church says about any given question." Bob, he went on to say he didn't foresee the church teaching changing in this regard, but that idea that changing attitudes have to occur before church teaching, what does that mean?
Yeah, I think that was the most unfortunate part of this interview. And I think that there, too, we see a reflection that he's groping around. He is not used to speaking in public like this. Bishop Barron said that he sat at the table with Pope Leo, then Robert Prevost, during the synod several times, and he was the most quiet participant on these synod tables. And so, he's a reticent man. He's thoughtful, but he's a reticent kind of man. And unfortunately, he gave the impression, I don't even like a pope using the term hot button issues, because it makes it look like what we're talking about is political issues rather than the dogmatic teachings of the church. This isn't just about, should there be this or that type of celebration on a feast day or one thing or another. These things are things that are negotiable, and they're issues in a kind of a generalized way. But when we're talking about LGBT, we're talking about the nature of man and woman placed in the Garden of Eden by God, and made in His image and likeness. A whole history of our Western civilization comes forth from that. A very honorable history, I think, in a number of ways. He's talked about the importance of the family, and how he knows that even talking about the traditional family, as we now have to call it, will anger some people. So, look, he's a little leery, I think, in touching these issues, and I think he misspoke there. I at least hope that he doesn't think that the Pope can change doctrine. He obviously can't. We receive doctrine and we develop it, as Newman told us, but we never change doctrine.
Well, Father, this is the danger of a pope granting these, extensive interviews over many days. You get dragged inevitably into areas that, frankly, if you're not someone comfortable with enunciating your thoughts in public, you can get pulled into areas where, frankly, you shouldn't go.
Yes, and this is the objection that's traditionally given to popes giving interviews. They didn't do that. Pius XII didn't give interviews. Paul VI didn't. There's a reason. Now, when the Pope is going to issue, for instance, a sermon or an audience talk, that's drafted, it's reviewed, there's a theologian who reads it. In other words, every care is taken in the Holy See, so what the Pope says will be doctrinally accurate, will be pastorally sensitive, and will be to the point. In an interview, that's, can be an intellectual ambush. If someone were to interview me and to say, well, the situation of the church in Bolivia, it includes the following. What do you think? I have no way of answering that question. I don't know what's going on in Bolivia. If the Pope is going to be asked stuff and then uses expressions such as, changing attitudes, my answer is, which attitudes are you referring to? Because there are good attitudes and there are bad attitudes.
Well, this is the question. Can you get a plurality of people supporting a given sin, and then we can move to ask for an official change in church teaching? I mean, talk, Father, about the nature of the church. Bob touched on this, the nature of church teaching. This is not something that the next guy elected can just wish away and declare, a new teaching. This is not within the job description or purview of the Pope.
That's correct. And this is where the struggle, this is why I object to polarization. Am I being polemical if I enunciate the teaching of the church when there are many people who object to it? Of course not. Father James Martin might say, well, you're polemical because you're saying the church's teaching is unchangeable. No, I'm not being polemical. I'm being Catholic. The Catholic Church does not present a program like the Democrats and the Republicans do every 4 years at their convention. 1 year they're in favor of this, then they flip. No, that's not how we do it. The church's teaching on morality is based on the natural law and divine revelation in the Old and New Testaments. The church's teaching on homosexuality has been consistent from the beginning. There is no possibility of changing it. And then when you say attitudes have to change, well, which attitude? I'm happy when I hear church teaching because it confirms me in my good instincts that there's an order in the world that God put there. If you say, well, it's a bad attitude because people who like to perform homosexual acts, they object because you say their acts are bad. That's not an attitude. They're using emotional appeals to try and silence people who make them feel bad. Actually, a bad conscience is one of the best things you can have because it's a reminder that you have a duty to God. The conscience is, Newman said the conscience is the aboriginal vicar of Christ. It's God speaking to you in a very mysterious way. So when I give a sermon and enough people are annoyed, as long as they didn't talk about something silly, okay, But if I talked about Catholic morality, if you're angry, I'm doing you a favor because I'm making you think.
Continuing with Pope Leo, he addressed the Diocese of Rome recently at the Lateran Basilica, and he encouraged the clergy and the diocese to accompany the people in a way that is, quote, supportive, empathetic, discreet, non-judgmental, and able to welcome everyone. Father, is non-judgmental attitudes and welcoming people, is that the new benchmark for the clergy?
This is, again, one of the areas where we have a huge amount of confusion in the church. Christ said, judge not lest you be judged. But the context reveals it's condemn not, because he also said that as part of that section of the gospel. Condemnation, meaning you can't pass a final judgment on the state of soul of someone you object to, but you certainly can issue what we call fraternal correction and saying your objective behavior violates the gospel standard. So we have to be judgmental.
Well, Bob, isn't welcoming people and accompanying them correcting them as well? I mean, that's what Jesus did. Jesus didn't say, hey, all you tax collectors and prostitutes, let's do more of what you're doing. No, he called them to something different. And that was accompaniment and welcome too.
As my colleague Brad Miner wrote at the Catholic Thing the other day, whatever happened to go and sin no more? That ultimately, look, and Leo says this in the interview. He says, we welcome everyone. And the real meaning of todos, 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 everybody, is not that we welcome you because you're a member of this or that group or ethnicity or sexual orientation. We welcome you because you're a child or you're a son or daughter of God. And so God welcomes everybody in, but he welcomes them to his world. He doesn't welcome them into changing his world or, redefining things or saying, I was born in the wrong body, so I have to transition into a different gender. It's an entirely different way of thinking about things than is typical in our democratic political discourse these days. And I'm glad that Leo said that, although then we get this other way of speaking about things that makes it look like we can't judge. And Father, I think, is exactly right, that we can't judge people's ultimate salvation or damnation. But even in that Jesuit discernment that Pope Francis promoted during his entire papacy, the watchword is see, judge, act. So you have to see an objective situation. If you don't do that, what are you? You're just sort of a passive witness to what's going on around you, and you accept everything that's happening. No,
Yeah.
you'd have to be a fool to be that sort of.
No,
person.
you're either deluded or crazy. Stirring up a bit of controversy. Speaking of deluded and crazy, the decision was made by the Chicago Archbishop, Cardinal Blase Cupich, to honor Illinois Senator Dick Durbin. Now, Durbin is a lifelong Democrat. They're granting him a, quote, Lifetime Achievement Award from the Archdiocesan Office of Human Dignity and Solidarity. Durbin's a Catholic with a long history of defending abortion on demand, etc. And he'll receive this award, quote, for his work with immigrants at a November 3rd fundraiser in Chicago. Remarkably, Bishop Thomas Paprocki of Springfield, Illinois, is condemning the move due to Durbin's record. And Senator Durbin actually resides in Springfield, but considers Cardinal Cupich in Chicago his bishop. Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco also weighed in, supporting Paprocki. Some have said Paprocki is threatening unity in the USCCB for taking this stand. Bob, your thoughts?
I used to go out to Chicago quite a bit, and I was quite close with the previous Cardinal Archbishop, Cardinal Francis George. And I used to push him about Senator Durbin, because Durbin obviously was one of the leaders of the Catholics who were pro-abortion. And I wanted him basically to take a public stand against Senator Durbin, but he said that he preferred to invite him in and to be pastoral with him. Now, for me, that was not enough, because there was a public offense, and it seemed to me that there needed to be a public rebuke of what was going on. But Cardinal George, a very intelligent man, a brave man in many ways, had to deal with the politics of Chicago and the politics of even his presbyterate in Chicago. But there's a difference between taking a different approach to somebody who's a public stumbling block, which is to say, he presents a scandal to the Catholic people, and honoring him with what is obviously a rationalization that he's good on immigration. Well, gee, that's wonderful that he's good. He's so-called good on immigration. But in the meantime, how many thousands of babies were never born, were killed in the womb because of the political activities of Senator Durbin? To call this a lifetime achievement, and then to say that, and actually I believe that the Archbishop has also said that this is a reaching out to the other side. I don't know what kind of reaching out this is. This is kind of a validation of people who say things in public that are contrary to the Catholic faith. So look, it's a tremendous scandal. I wish other bishops would weigh in on this, not just Paprocki and Cordileone. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to see this, but maybe a new day will dawn with a American Pope in Rome who may take a different view of things, and he's from Chicago.
Yeah, well, Father, Cardinal Cupich is defending the honor this way. He said, at the heart of the consistent ethic of life is the recognition that Catholic teaching on the life and dignity cannot be reduced to a single issue, even an issue as important as abortion. The annual celebration of immigrants, Keep Hope Alive, will recognize all the critically important contributions Senator Durbin has taken to advance Catholic social teaching in the areas of immigration, care for the poor, Laudato Si, and world peace. Father, your reaction, is that good enough? Does that wash away all the other abortion objections?
Well, two answers. Number one, abortion's a crime, not an issue. So the language is very revelatory. Secondly, let's say that, so he says Senator Durbin's bad on abortion, good on immigration. Let's say it was the other way around. Let's say he was against abortion, but was in favor of shooting immigrants who enter the country illegally and then burying them somewhere. Would he be given an honor if that was his political stance? Of course not. What this does is minimizes the importance of abortion, because the Democratic Party is not interested in stopping abortion. And Dick Durbin, as a loyal Democrat, is not going to buck that. He probably believes that abortion's okay. He certainly votes that way. Well, if that's what he thinks, the Catholic Church has to step away and say, look, you are not following the teaching of Christ, and therefore Christ's representatives are not going to honor you, because we're going to send the message out to voters and everybody else. The Catholic Church says it's against abortion, but it's not really against it, because we honor the people who fund and pay for it. So Cardinal Supic's decision is unthinkable in the reign of Pius XII, okay? Never would have happened. Now, Pope Leo's got to step up and say, in the reign of Pope Leo, are we going to allow Catholic politicians to be honored by Catholic cardinals? We have to stop this.
Yeah. I looked it up. The Archdiocese of Chicago actually has, and Bob, you know this, it probably originated under Cardinal Francis George, that there's a longstanding policy of not granting awards to politicians who oppose church moral teaching. This would constitute a violation of church moral teaching. I'll give you the last word on this topic, Bob.
Yeah, and the Bishops' Conference as a whole has warned against this as well, because, look, we have enough confusion already in the world about what Catholics teach. And as Father rightly says, people look at what you do. If you say that you're against something or you're for something, that's fine. They pay attention to it. They listen to what you're saying. But if you then go to Washington and what you do is you say, oh, well, look, personally, I'm against abortion, but you people out there, kill all the babies you want. You know, it's a decision that you have to make. I can't make that for you. That's effectively what a lot of these Catholic politicians have been doing for years. I applaud both Paprocki and Cordileone. Cordileone has told Nancy Pelosi not to present herself for communion in the Archdiocese of San Francisco, which was a courageous thing to do, because we know what the social environment is like out there in San Francisco and the power that she wields. And we need some more bishops to step up that way and take the hit. You know, it's not going to be pretty, but if you're going to be a Catholic bishop, be a Catholic bishop.
This is a rather odd story. Pope Leo delivered a video message to a mixed faith audience in his native Chicago. Again, we're back in Chicago. This was before an ALS Walk for Life gala. Watch.
Our Jewish brothers and sisters tell us that one of the great projects given the human family by God is to complete and perfect the very good creation given us, Tikkun Olam. As our Muslim friends share in the Hadith, we are told that 70,000 angels are present when caretakers arrive in the morning. 70,000 other angels arrive in the evening. I believe that you too are angels. I pray that rather than being possessed by frustration or hopelessness or despair, you surrender yourself to the mystery of human existence, to the love of your caregivers, and to the embrace of the Divine One.
Father, your thoughts on the language used there? Obviously, the Pope's trying to be inclusive, but no Jesus, just the Divine One.
Yeah, the Divine One, yes, certainly God is divine, so he is the Divine One, but that's not the usual language that we use. We use the Holy Trinity, we speak about the incarnate Son of God. It's all good. I agree with him that we have to promote works of charity and love, and religious, differences don't absolve us of the obligation to love our neighbor. So, of course, that's all to the good. But using this kind of Irenicist language, I don't like that. In fact, I've noted that over the years. Whenever Catholics have ecumenical meetings, they tend not to use the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit if they're for interreligious people present. That's a mistake. We should always start everything in the Catholic Church in the name of the Holy Trinity.
Yeah. Bob, it didn't disturb me that he quoted, Jewish teachings and Muslim teachings, but the natural follow-on is, and Jesus teaches us X, Y, Z.
Yeah, at a time when even many Catholics don't know our own tradition. And sometimes, people in the public eye, as I often am, I'm sure you are, Raymond, too, you're shocked at how little our Catholics actually know, or how they've been misinformed by just the atmosphere around us and the way that the media tend to distort what the church is about. It would be great to quote from the Gospels, and say that we believe that what our Lord has told us is the culmination of all these good impulses that exist in other religious traditions. To do that would, of course, again, put yourself in the crosshairs. But if you're unwilling to do that, you're not really willing to stand up for Jesus. And I think Leo wants to do that. I mean, we see that in the interview. He emphasizes that quite a bit.
There's another aspect of the interview, this Crux interview, where he said, quote, "It's very difficult to discover the presence of God in artificial intelligence." Leo recently refused to allow the creation of a personal avatar of himself. So, this technology is weighing heavily on his mind. Father, your thoughts about AI and the implications?
Yeah, no, it's a very important question for mankind to figure out how we're going to legally frame the use of this new tool in the scientific toolbox. And it's very important that it not be used for evil purposes. And the Pope is absolutely right about that. On the other hand, it is a very useful tool. And the Pope says it in the interview. I was pleased. He said in medical operations, when you're doing surgery, artificial intelligence can be very useful. And cancer research, artificial intelligence can view cells much more quickly and thoroughly than the human eye or other mechanisms. So for me, I'm not a scientist. I'm fascinated when things, develop, but I don't know enough to tell people what to do. But I do know, as a canon lawyer and with a legal mind, governments that want to do justice must regulate this so that you don't have AI activities promoting crime and harm to people and illegal drug use and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Ed Pendon's reporting, our correspondent friend in Rome, this week that Pope Leo has received African Cardinal Robert Sarah in a private audience. The details of the meeting remain private, but in a recent interview, Cardinal Sarah said he was looking with great confidence to Leo's pontificate. He wishes fiducia supplicans. That was the document under Pope Francis that allowed gay marriages and relationships to be blessed. Cardinal Sarah says that document should be forgotten. Sarah's praised Leo's focus on Christ, his spirit of listening, dialogue, prudent consideration of tradition. He also has called into question the crackdown on the traditional Latin Mass. Your thoughts, Bob, on this audience and what it might yield?
Yeah, I wish we had some more detail about this, because obviously when a figure like Father James Martin, who's a darling of the mainstream media, meets with the Pope, that immediately gets broadcast everywhere, and the spin starts as if, Pope Leo's getting weak. He's pro-LGBT. I think he's already laid down some markers that the receiving of LGBT is going to be on Catholic principles, but I hope we'll see more of that in the future.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, when someone like Cardinal Burke meets with the Pope, and he's going to be doing a High Latin Mass in St. Peter's Basilica in a few weeks, or Cardinal Sarah, who is one of the deepest spirits we have among the hierarchy of the Church. When they meet, we don't get the same kind of media buzz. We don't get the sense of there's something else bubbling up in the Church. And so I'm encouraged that on the one hand, there's going to be this opening to the traditional Latin Mass, and on the other hand, that Pope Leo was willing to spend enough time with Cardinal Sarah, who he probably knows is a wise counselor and a deep spirit who he would be wise to listen carefully to. So let's hope that develops over the future and it begins to manifest itself in how the Church is seen publicly.
Well, this is also the emerging Church. I mean, this is the only font of ordinations and real growth we're seeing in the Church. It's there. It's in Africa. Some cultural news I need to get to, both related to the assassination of Charlie Kirk and its aftermath. In the wake of the tragedy, late-night host Jimmy Kimmel was suspended, then reinstated days later. For comments he made regarding the assassination, he tried to say that the MAGA and the conservatives were somehow to blame for this murderer. And then the aftermath was characterized as an act of censorship. Was it an act of censorship, Father, or government censorship?
As far as I can see, the government had nothing to do with it. It's the management and ownership of that network that did. Yeah. So, the very people who get upset when a businessman shuts down a failing enterprise or something that brings discredit on the business, wait a minute. That's not your business. You don't own it. You're not invested in it. So businessmen can do what they want, and it's up to them to, fight it in court if they get sued by the person they remove.
Yeah. Bob, I have to get to this, and then I'll get Father's reaction as well. The memorial for Charlie Kirk was held at Cardinal Stadium in Phoenix before a near-capacity crowd. Millions of people looked in. His widow, Erica Kirk, delivered an emotional, very powerful remarks about her late husband and the movement he started, his faith, and notably, Mrs. Kirk declared that she had forgiven her husband's killer. Your thoughts, Bob, on that event and its effects?
Yeah, I watched that with my wife, and the two of us had tears in our eyes when she said that, because it was clearly something that she struggled to be able to say. And God bless her. Your husband is just dead in a horrible fashion. This unfortunately deluded young man who gets sucked into left-wing politics and the whole trans ideology thing, shoots your husband, and you go and you stand up in front of not only those 20,000 people in the stadium itself, but millions of people all around the world. I got a note from a priest who told me that he was talking with a priest in, I think, Zaire, and that this priest is out in the wilds evangelizing, and everybody is talking about Charlie Kirk. I mean, it's just amazing the way that the story went out around the world. But that's what we're called to do. I mean, Jesus says, forgive your enemies, pray for them. I've written 2 books about martyrs, and one of the things that's always struck me about martyrs is the way that even at the point when they've got the gun pointing at them, or they're about to be killed in some other fashion, very few of them apostatize, and almost all of them are there praying and forgiving the people who are about to kill them. So look, to me, it was, as many people have said, it was a kind of a Protestant evangelical event in terms of the affect of it.
Yes.
But that was really a culminating moment, and maybe for the Christianity in the United States, a turning point in and of itself.
Father, I have to say, I was at a football game watch party, okay? And the game was so bad, they flipped on the Charlie Kirk Memorial. You had men who, these are guys who don't practice faith at all. Tears in their eyes, some of them saying they had just opened the Bible for the first time in their lives after Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And this moment clearly had an effect on young men in particular for whatever reason. What are you seeing or hearing?
Yeah, no, I think to the words of Scripture, where sin has abounded, grace has abounded even more. I mean, what Charlie's wife did was a manifestation of her deep faith and love of God. We are called to forgive those who persecute us. And she did it in this, as Bob said, to millions and millions of people with great confidence and love. This is how the world gets converted. This is why martyrs and those that, are associated with them, family members and friends, this is why they have such an influence on the world. I mean, look, you mentioned Jimmy Lai earlier. Jimmy Lai is a Catholic convert, who's an elderly man at this point in an unair-conditioned cell, who is being persecuted precisely because he upholds what Christ said, the freedom of the sons of God. That's an inspiration. I every day I think about Jimmy and I say, I'm so happy that we have people like that in the world. And I had, the Kirk family now becomes one of the most important historical figures in the history of the United States because they exemplify what Christianity means to this country. It's the bedrock of how we treat each other.
Yeah, it's curious. Trump was at the UN after that event, and he said, no country can survive without law, borders, and religion. I thought it was an interesting addenda there, which you don't often hear at the UN. So that was, pretty telling. Even Trump has been moved by this event. Gents, we're going to leave it there. Grateful to you all as always. And look, if you want more of the Arroyo Grande Prayerful Posse, subscribe to the Arroyo Grande Show on YouTube, the Arroyo Grande Podcast, wherever you get yours. On behalf of Robert Royal, Father Gerald Murray, until the posse rides again, stay the course, follow the light. I'm Raymond Arroyo. We'll see you next time. Arroyo Grande is produced in partnership with iHeart Podcasts and is available on the iHeart Radio app or wherever you get your podcasts.